Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Monday, January 21st, West Fargo City Commission meeting. Would you please join me to our Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First order of business is to approve the order of the agenda. Gentlemen?
I move we approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please? Commissioner Jurdevig. Moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda for Monday, January 21st, West Fargo City Commission meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is the approval of the minutes from January 7th, 2019. They have been distributed. They're in pages 2 through 3 on the year packet.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Olson. And moved and seconded to approve the minutes of January 17th, 2019. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, on the minutes there it says January 15th. The date.
You're correct.
I just move that we can correct that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any additions or corrections to the minutes as they were distributed? Commissioner Thorstead.
I think maybe we just got the wrong copy. This is from 2018. January 15th, 2018 is the copy I got.
My copy says the 7th.
You get your, I got mine sent to me. Yours is from Laserfish. That's probably the problem. So
okay. We'll check into that. Thank you, Commissioner Thorstead.
Okay, just as long as I got the wrong date. Right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. We've had discussion. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. Approval of the minutes as noted by Commissioner Thorstead. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business. Building permits have been distributed. The commissioners, is there any questions of Mr. Solberg?
I move we approve them.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Thorstead. Been moved and seconded to approve the building permits as distributed. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving the building permits as distributed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the bills from pages 4 through 8, pledging of assets for 2019, page 9, 2019 road class upgrades, page 10, games of chance for Holy Cross Catholic Church, Knights of Columbus, games to be conducted, raffle at Holy Cross Catholic Church, on page 11, and employee vacation hours rollover for 2018 and 2019 is on page 12. What are your wishes?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. Been moved to accept the consent agenda for Monday, January 21st as presented. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jurdevig. Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda for Monday, January 21st, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Moving on to the regular agenda. First order of the business is the approve the sale of refunding improvement bonds of 2019, Series A. Mr. Shockley.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the West Fargo City Commission. Tonight I'm pleased to introduce to you the resolution refunding some previously issued bonds. These consisted of some 2008 and 2009 bonds. As Mike will go over the sale results, we had very good sale results. The total savings over the course of the entire bond issue was about $715,000. In today's dollars, when it's present valued in today's dollars, it's about $596,000. So quite a significant savings. The resolution is in front of you. Mike can go over the sale results. I can answer any questions about the resolution, but we'd need a motion and a second to approve the bond resolution.
Thank you, John. Mayor Dardis and Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity to be here again this evening. And as you remember from my December meeting, these results are significantly better than we had projected, although we're conservative when we come in front of you because nobody knows where the market's going to be 4 to 6 weeks down the road. As a result of some turmoil in the stock market, we've had some flight to security, which always entails lower interest rates for bonds. So right spot, right time, no real magic involved there. It worked out very well. We're up 3 percentage points on present value benefit. And as I told you in December, we looked for about 4%. GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, recommends that to move forward with the refunding. And the combined refunding present value benefit 7.68. The 2009 Cs come in at an 8.9 present value benefit percentage. So, and the 2008 Cs are at a 5.22, and so that both of them are well over industry norms to recommend going forward. And it's a combined issue. Moody's once again reaffirmed your A1 credit. That's, of course, strong for you when we do a public sale. The numerous bids that we received in a negotiated sale such as this, it meant a lot to us to be able to market an A1 credit to investors, and they responded. So here we are with a very good savings opportunity for the city. We'll continue to do this on an annual basis, and I'll look at it every 6 months as well. But intend to be in front of you in December, January meetings, so that everybody's up to speed on where we're at, recommending going forward in the future as well.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the commissioners? Thank you. We appreciate your work.
Absolutely.
As stated by Mr. Shockley, this is an actionable item that we approve the sale of refunding improvement bonds for 2019 Series A. Your wishes, commissioners?
Motion approved.
Thank you, Commissioner Thorstead. It's been moved. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Olson. It's been moved and seconded to approve the report of approve the sale of refunding improvement bonds for 2019 Series A. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again. Next order of business on the regular agenda is Tevye Additional Special Assessment Discussion. Mr. Mike Rahm. Mr. Rahm, please. If you'd restate your name and your address, please, for the record.
Good evening. My name is Michael Rahm. I'm an attorney with the Frederickson & Byron Law Firm. Our address is at 51 Broadway, downtown Fargo.
Thank you, sir.
So I work with the architect, Chris Hawley, and then Steve Johnson of the Vogel firm, and I sort of jointly working to represent the landowner. He's out of the country tonight, so if you get stuck with me. I'm aware that the last thing you want on a snowy Monday night is somebody coming in to talk about something that I'm sure you thought was resolved, so thank you for taking the time to hear us out. A few quick points. As you're aware, Tevye seeks to replat a plot of land from agricultural in order to do some building. And as part of that platting, there's been a request by the city to sign an acknowledgement with respect to future special assessments. And there's been resistance from Tevye to do that. And I want to address that if I could, and I'll try to be as brief as I can, but I want to make a few points. First, this is, in our experience, kind of an unusual request. The city has the power to do special assessments, and it doesn't really matter if you tell people in advance or not. At no point has anyone suggested that the landowner is giving up any of its formal rights here. In fact, this document's drafted to make clear that it's not. And so it's kind of a document with no legal effect. And I have a tough time explaining to clients why they should sign something that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Frankly, I'm not your lawyer, of course, but it does seem to me that this, to some degree, makes maybe just muddies the water with respect to special assessments in the future. If you have some landowners who have to sign these things and some don't, I think you should expect that those who don't show up and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't assess me, I didn't have to sign this thing. And you may say, well, that doesn't matter, I have that power anyway. Which brings me back to my first point. Why do we have to do this, since you have the power to do a special assessment, whether we acknowledge that fact or not? So as I say, this document doesn't really change anybody's rights, and I have a tough time explaining to my client why he should sign it as a result. Second, if your concern, as I think I understand it, is primarily notice, I think you want Tevye not to be able to show up later and say, hey, this special assessment bill is shocking to me, I had no idea it was coming. You got that, right? You have all these email communications that Mr. Shockley referenced in his memo. There's been 2 commission meetings where it's been said, if someone shows up later and says, hey, I didn't know this was coming, that won't be true. You'll be able to show it's not true. And frankly, I don't think it matters anyway. Now, third, I guess if you are going to insist on something, the document as it's drafted, we have a couple of concerns about it that I would like to address briefly. This is in the package that Mr. Shockley provided. The first might seem small, but it's important to us. The 4th whereas clause says that the property owner has been advised of such a possibility and wishes to execute this acknowledgement. The landowner does not wish to execute this acknowledgement. It might seem like a small point, but it feels very coercive to the landowner. You're going to do this and you're going to like it. And that's not something we're willing to sign.
Sir, may I interrupt you for 1 second,
Absolutely.
if you don't mind? Thank you.
It's your
Because
meeting.
I'm pretty certain I recall you being here when we did this. Were you here when we did this?
I was not.
Your co-workers were whoever, and they said, no problem.
The architect, Chris Hawley.
The architect was here, and he said, this is no problem. He said, we have no problem with this.
At that time, this document was not before him. He was not concerned. He had no problem with the fact that there could be specials or that they could be significant. He acknowledged that, and I'm not disputing that. But this document, which wants to be recorded, right, what we're being asked to sign is a document that will be recorded in the public records. That was not before him that night. He couldn't have agreed to it. He didn't have it. That came afterwards. It was only when we got it later that we were able to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not exactly what we expected. So there was no public meeting where anybody stood up and said, this document here is acceptable to us.
When we talked about the price, it could be that much money. The architect said, yeah, that's not a problem. We're not worried about it.
We don't and again,
What are you disputing? What are you disputing in the document?
I don't think we should have to sign anything at all, frankly. But if we do, we're not comfortable with this. I was just about to get to that. You got to the same place I did. We're not comfortable signing it with the $500,000 in it because everybody agrees that that's not the right number.
Would you rather have $1 million in there? Because that's probably going to be closer to where it's going to be.
I'd rather have no number in there because we don't know what the number is going to be. Nobody knows what it's going to be, and so what's the point of having a number that's kind of made up? If you just want to make sure that the landowner knows it could be big, there, you just said on the record, it could be $1 million. Okay, it's out there. Now that's a public statement. But the landowner shouldn't have to acknowledge something that is clearly an incorrect number. It could be more, it could be less, we don't know. And so asking the landowner to sign an acknowledgement of something that's incorrect and not true is problematic.
John?
So first of all, the request to sign the acknowledgement was part of the plat approval as a condition imposed by the City Commission. Staff do not have any authority to change a condition that's imposed by the City Commission. If the City Commission desired to change that condition, you certainly have that authority. Second, in reviewing the video, which we did, it was clearly acknowledged whether or not they had the authority to acknowledge that. That might be some sort of suit between the landowner and whether or not the person making that representation had that authority. That's not the city's business. It is simply an acknowledgement that they may get assessed an amount above $500,000, which frankly is probably closer to $1 million. It's 10 acres out there. That's only $2 a square foot for assessments. Sometimes assessments run $2 to $4 a square foot. It doesn't require him to waive his rights. And as to the suggestion that other property owners don't have to sign this, that's not correct. We're requiring another subdivision that's just north of there to sign this. And as a common practice, when developers come in and petition for improvements, we require them to petition into the improvements. One of the issues that this council in particular, or commission in particular, has expressed is wanting to make sure that people have knowledge of special assessments. So this is a commission decision whether or not you want to impose this condition. So, and we tried to draft it so that it wasn't heavy-handed, that they're not giving up any of their disputes regarding the special assessments. And yes, it will be recorded. It's not just for this property owner. I guess my concern is if the house gets built, it's clearly a very large house. It's somewhere in 20,000 square feet, somebody had told me, on a 10-acre lot. If it gets sold again and another buyer buys it that's not part of this discussion, they're going to say, well, nobody told me it would have a lot of special assessments on it. And so this is entirely a policy-driven question. It's up to the commission if you want to keep it in place. Staff will do what the commission tells us to do.
Ron, did you have some more points that you wanted to make on the document?
No, I think you've heard me. Again, I'll finish with this only, which is that, as Mr. Shockley said, if the concern is notice to the landowner, you've got that. You don't need this document signed to have that. We'd appreciate it if you would reconsider. As Mr. Shockley said, it's a policy choice. We'd urge you to reconsider and not require a signature of this in order to complete the plat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Shockley, do you have any other advice for us?
I do not. Since it's a current plat condition, I think you'd have to have a motion to reconsider before to make it procedurally proper. You'd need a motion and a second to reconsider. I think it was unanimous approval, so any commissioner could make the motion to reconsider. Whether there's sufficient votes, that's another story, and then you'd want to bring back the matter to reconsider it. So it's up to the commission how you want to proceed.
How long have they had the agreement?
Oh, I think we sent it to them in July, Tim, didn't we?
Mr. Silver.
Thank you. So the other caveat to this is we have an ordinance that requires that a plat be recorded within 6 months of its approval. January 16th was 6 months from that approval. They had the acknowledgement probably very shortly after that approval, so it's been kind of floating out there since then. So if the commission's desire is to change this acknowledgement, we would also ask that the plat be reapproved then along with that with this added condition. You could do that tonight, or you could wait for me to bring it before you at the next meeting as well with a better presentation. So.
Other thoughts?
I just have one.
Simmons.
Thank you, Mayor. Dustin, or I'm sorry, maybe even Tim, and I know that we gave him a approval to kind of bill at your own risk, right? Part of this was bill at your own risk type deal until you get the...
I was as clear as I could be on that there's really not much of an approval. What it really is you can start building, and we're not going to give you a notice of violation for construction. There's really no inspection there. You're kind of, it's building at your own risk, but there's... I
guess I was under the impression that somewhere during all of our building projects that when they do that, they can build the foundation, but they can't go above that.
There's really no authority for me to authorize a permit for anything until it's approved.
But I get that. But so what I'm saying right now is they've gone above the foundation. They're actually putting rafters and part of the roof on, from my understanding. Are they in violation right now of our process?
In my mind, I've authorized no permits. So without the plat being done, legally, there's not really authority to be building there. So
correct.
And so they're already building. So in other words, they're in violation right now as we speak.
Correct. And we also have a city ordinance in place that if they're in violation of other conditions, they can't get any additional city approvals. And so we've discontinued inspections out on the site.
So I guess where I'm going with this, I don't know that we can make that decision tonight because they're already in violation. Because they are in violation, our new statutes, our statutes say that we can't do anything with it anyway.
Unless they can provide assurance to the city commission that they'll complete the conditions. There's a safe harbor. If they can bring to the commission certain standards or certain documentation that they can complete what's required of them, then they can go forward with it. In this case, they've had the acknowledgement the original acknowledgement was dated in July, so I agree with Tim. They probably had it since mid-July. The only comments I've had regarding changing the language in the acknowledgement have been to remove the $500,000 amount. And that was very specifically directed by the City Commission. So if the City Commission wants to remove that and they agree to sign it, they would come back into compliance then. But in the current form, the city is not inspecting the premises at all. They're building at their own risk, and they won't be able to get a certificate of occupancy. We would try to notify, if the violations continue, then we would notify the municipal prosecution, start that, and we may also take other appropriate action because they are building in violation.
And I guess just for the other commissioners, my personal opinion is that they gave us a commitment to sign this document, and they didn't do it, and now they have to give us another commitment to say that they're going to finish the project even the proper way. I don't know how much, I guess, sway I would put into that either. So if we can make that, Mayor, get that recommendation, I would make a recommendation that we deny any vote.
I'm going to break protocol here a little bit. Gentlemen in the, representing the owners, Tim, would you please have a chair stay with us? Sir? Please state your name and address.
Kendall Radke, Chris Hawley Architects, 3564 South University Drive, Fargo.
Kendall?
Kendall, yes.
Thank you, sir.
We do have a building permit issued by the city, and there have been inspections up until this point. So footing and foundations were inspected, gas lines have been inspected. Everything that's been completed to date has been inspected. There has been a hold on it since, so we can't get a framing inspection until things are resolved.
Thank you, sir. What are the wishes of the commission?
I think I have one on the table, don't I, John?
Actually, I don't think you need to take any action. The condition's out there. I mean, if you wanted to change it, it's up to the commission. You need a motion to reconsider.
Motion to reconsider, right?
And I guess I would go so far as to say that if the commission doesn't change its mind, I would strongly recommend that the property owner sign the acknowledgement. It doesn't impose anything upon them. They have the right to contest their assessments. It's just the $500,000 was a number that was picked by the commission. I think it's very low. Most of our assessments, even for stormwater, run anywhere from 30 cents to $1 per square foot, and that's just for stormwater. Cheyenne Street is right out immediately in front of the property. There's other improvement districts that may impact that parcel. So, I mean, I've tried to be as clear and upfront with the landowner's attorney as possible that I don't think the $500,000 number is at all inaccurate. I think if anything, it's on the low side, but that's why we put may result in substantial special assessments in the future in excess of $500,000. It was very clearly, and it was placed in the whereas clause, so it's just a notice. I don't know where else to go with this other than it was a condition of plat approval. We were told at the meeting that they could sign it.
I have a question for John.
On
the other acknowledgements for the other developments you're talking about, is there a dollar figure in those?
The one to the north, that is $1 million. The landowner's attorney had requested the $1 million be taken out of that one, but the city said no, the city staff, so.
And was that signed?
Brought that before you yet. So they're standing firm, and we're standing firm and not bringing it to you until they are willing to at least acknowledge.
Commissioner Thorstead.
I guess, seems to me like we're just splitting hairs here. I think the point of putting out whatever amount we put out, we just want to make them publicly aware of what they might be facing, and that's a matter of public record, whether it's in our minutes, it's in video, and I strongly suggest we keep that within our files. Whether they sell it to the next person, what we're telling them or not telling them is immaterial. I mean, that's between them and the next buyer. I think we have it in our record strongly that it's going to be significant specials. We don't have that number today because this is going to be a protracted process. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year. But over time, it certainly could be cumulative over that. So I guess I don't know if it's giving them heartburn. I don't know what advantage that gives us as a city to have that written in there. Yes, it probably reflects the comments of the commission, But that's also a matter of public record in the minutes and the public video of it. So that being said, I'll make a motion to reconsider.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Olson. Been moved and seconded that we reconsider the actions taken on what date? July 2nd with regard to Tevye. Is there any further discussion?
There is one. Could I ask,
Commissioner Schmidt?
what is the staff recommendation? What's the actual staff recommendation here?
If I'll speak for planning staff, I think the important thing is to make sure that they acknowledge this. And we do agreements all the time. In this case, we didn't have an agreement because there was no public improvements. And so I think when the commission asked us at that point, how do we do this? That's where the thought of the acknowledgement came up. So the acknowledgement was a vehicle, an instrument that we could use that would be recorded against the property to point out something that we put in agreements all the time and record against property. So we felt was a good vehicle. I would only add, and with all due respect, Commissioner Thorstad, if there were to be maybe a friendly amendment to that motion, that there be something that we record against the property, some sort of acknowledgement. And if it's not the $500,000 in there, at least we use some sort of language that says could be substantial so that they understand, and future homeowners that would potentially buy this property.
I'd be comfortable with that. Personally, I think, we're just acknowledging that we're letting them know there's going to be significant specials. And again, it's already a matter of public record. And if we refer to the fact that it was discussed at whatever commission meetings, it was because it's been discussed a couple times and had that in there. But setting a dollar amount, we don't know for sure if it's going to be 500,000, a million, or 200. We don't know because we don't know what the future lies. That's just a guesstimate, and I don't know how we bind them to that number or any number down the road.
I don't know that perfect number either. It's just substantial is all we can say at this point.
A question I would have is it any clearer to a future landowner by having this signed? I mean, is that a clearer way of some future acknowledgement 30 years down the road when somebody else buys that property?
Again, excuse me, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Dudek, the point is that gets recorded against the property so that when you go to purchase your property, nobody can ever say, well, you weren't notified. When you do your title search, you find that.
Yeah, I would echo what Tim has said. I actually, probably 15 years ago, litigated a case in which there was a waiver that was recorded on property for deferred special assessments. And there was a big issue between the buyer and seller about whether or not that was disclosed. And so I think there is value in an acknowledgement, and that's why we actually put it in all the developers' agreements and where there's public improvements. Here it was just private installation, but it's such a big lot. From a public policy standpoint, you're always concerned that if you have a subsequent buyer, do they realize, is there some type of notice in the file that's recorded that their attorney who's doing the title opinion will say, well, by the way, there's this acknowledgement that the property could be subject. I would suggest that in conversations with their attorney from Vogel, he had suggested that removing the $500,000 number, they would sign something that said it's substantial assessments. And so I don't know if it's just simply removing the number, but that was suggested by his attorney.
Commissioner, or Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Maybe one way to compromise here would be to instead of identifying this lot of having potential $500,000 of an assessment, I believe John alluded to it earlier, but maybe we acknowledge an average an assessment and provide a range, an average assessment for whether it's a commercial property or a residential property, but $2 to $4 or $3 to $5. We can do some of that research, and just in this particular area, is it common for a lot to have, say, $3 a square foot, and then we could also add on to that and say which, in this case, is equivalent to X dollars.
The only thing I would say is over time that will change as there's inflation and time goes. The other thing I mentioned about specials is there may well be a cumulative 500,000 or $1 million, but that's over a time. So they already have specials on there that are already on the clock getting paid off. So, you can say that number, and I doubt we're ever going to hit, but maybe it could happen. They're going to hit with 500 at one crack, I don't know, I guess I don't know what stuff costs down the road, but again, I'm fine with what Tim suggested. Say, just understand you're going to have substantial specials in time on this, but setting the dollar amount, I think that's just arbitrary, and we're taking a stab in the dark as to what it will be at any point in time.
So to clarify, that would be just removing the number but keeping the acknowledgement as a condition?
That would be my suggestion, yeah, removing the number so that we're not saying it's going to be any given number, but just know that there's going to be substantial specials over the life of this property.
And that's noted. That's the way that the motion then is on the table at this time. Commissioner Simmons.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to go back to you, John, again here, because I want to make sure I understand this right. Are they today in violation?
They have not signed the acknowledgement, and the plat has not been recorded. So they are building on unplatted property. They received a building permit that was billed at your own risk. Once it was determined that they were not going to sign the acknowledgement, we sent notice to them that we would discontinue the inspections until they came into compliance. Compliance currently is execution of an acknowledgement with the $500,000 amount in it.
So they're out of compliance? Is that what you're telling me? So I guess what I'm asking here is, our statute says that if you're out of compliance, we can't do anything. So is that what we're trying to maneuver tonight? I mean, if we can't do anything, that means, in my eyes, we can't make this vote tonight. But
if they, the statute has or the ordinance has a safe harbor where if they can guarantee that they will come into compliance. So I would ask their representatives if they would affirm on the record that they will sign it. If they won't sign it, then I would agree that you can't take any action because we don't know if they'll come into compliance.
That's what I want to know.
So the question really boils down to is whether they would sign it.
So I'll ask the attorney.
Mr. Ron, you step to the podium. Thank you.
We take the dollars out, we'll sign it.
Thank you, sir.
And just so that we're clear on the record, and I hate to be the lawyer in the room, but could you state on the record that as the representative of the property owner, you would sign, you're authorized to say that your client would sign the acknowledgement with the removal of the $500,000 amount?
Just said that.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Thank you, sir. I want to make something very clear. Since this body, these commissioners were elected, as was myself in April, it has become very, very clear to me and to all of us, the city staff, that the public wants us to be transparent and wants us to say these are pending specials. We've been having special assessment meetings, Mr. Ron, and it's overwhelming how the public views the communications from the city commission and city staff as being inadequate. This action taken on July 2nd was not towards Mr. Chris Hawley or this gentleman that owns this property. This was a directive from the public and from the taxpayers that they wanted more transparency and they wanted to know what potential pending assessments would look like. So with all due respect to the owner and to you and to everybody involved, we are doing what the directive of our taxpayers has asked us to do. So the fact that we have an acknowledgement and we have talked about the dollar amounts, I just think it's important that the public understand that. This was not to single out this property owner. This is a loud communication that's come to us from our taxpayers. So that being said, we have a motion to reconsider on the table. It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? Mr. Soberg.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask also that we clarify that acknowledgement within that motion is added, and also if I could ask potentially then just reapproval of the plat so that 6-month time clock starts then today again, so that I can get that recorded and not bring it back to you at the next meeting.
Is that all right with the second?
I'm concerned about the 6-month time slot. What do you give? Are we giving them another 6 months to continue?
By ordinance we would, but we're going to wrap it up here. I mean, technically by ordinance, but they can't continue that halt on inspections continues until that plat is recorded.
Okay.
So, but technically there's a 6-month window by ordinance.
I'll ask the question again. Is that acceptable to the second? because any amendment after that point has to be accepted by the second first. And the motion. Mike? All right, thank you, Tim. Is there any further discussion?
Mayor, could I call for a roll call vote, please, on this?
Certainly. That's acceptable. And can we reread the motion, please? The motion to reconsider. Do you have it, Brittany?
Bullet form.
Go ahead and have a stab at it.
Motion to reconsider the action from the July 2nd, 2018 moving the $500,000 number, but replacing that with something about substantial specials to be assessed over the life of the property, and then the reapproval of the plat with the 6 months time slot.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you. You got it.
And it does say substantial special assessments, right? Just wanted to make sure.
There were two different terms used, significant and substantial. Which do you prefer, Mr. Shockley?
I would say that we could just remove from the acknowledgement that's in your packet and the second whereas clause, just strike in the future in excess of 500,000. So it would now read, whereas said parcel is a significant size which may result in substantial special assessments.
Thank you, sir. We'll proceed to vote. Roll call vote. Mr. Thorstad?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
No.
Mr. Jurdovic?
Yes.
Bernie Dardis? No. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Item number 3 on the regular agenda is review Cheyenne Street Phase 3 engineering contract. Mr. Brungart.
Mr. President, Commissioners, bringing tonight is a construction contract with KLJ Engineering for Phase 3 Cheyenne Street. This is very similar to the contract we executed with them last year for Phase 1 and 2. It's an initial setup contract for a scoping phase. They're asking for this sum for this contract to be $150,000. It'll include the utility coordination, pre-construction meeting, initial survey staking, and the scoping for the full fees as we go out throughout the contract. The purpose for the initial contract is they have not had the ability to sit down with the contractor and look at his schedule and get their staffing. So after this initial contract, they'll be coming back again with an amendment to the contract for the full amount. Available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brungart. I'd ask a joint question of you and Mr. Scott. Do you think that this is an appropriate dollar amount? Is this within standards or whatever?
I think it's
surprised by it. Is it high? What do you think?
No, I think they're being conservative and they put it on the high side. KLJ's engineering contract is on an hourly basis, so we only pay for the number of hours that they use. So if they do not use the $150,000, we will not be charged for the $150,000.
Okay, how many hours is that at $150,000?
They pay about $200 an hour. So it's a very substantial amount.
Would you consider putting a cap on the hours so they have to come back?
Well,
I'm going to leave this to your discretion. These are just questions, gentlemen.
Sure. President Dardis, I'm going to start by answering the first question. Is this contract appropriate or in line? Chris and I looked at it, and it is in line with the other contracts we've executed with KLJ on Cheyenne Street, and it also matches pretty closely with what was executed on 12th Avenue for the design engineering with Apex, and then the construction engineering with Moore Engineering. The percentages are, if you were to look at the overall engineering cost for design and construction for the Cheyenne Street corridor and compare it to other improvement projects we've had, the percentages are a little higher. But it again is consistent with the nature of the work that we've asked for and scoped out within these contracts. So again, back to the first question is yes, I'd say it is in line.
Thank you, sir. So, what's your pleasure, Commissioners?
Move we approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Simmons. Been moved and seconded to approve the Cheyenne Street Phase 3 engineering contract at $150,000. $150,000. Is there any further discussion? Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Brungart. Next order of business is item number 4, Community Improvement Plan Introduction, better known as the CIP. Mr. Brungart.
Mr. President, Commissioners, including your packet is a slideshow I'm about to present here and talk about our community investment plan. Really is a capital improvement plan, but I think it's more descriptive about how it serves our community and the investment of these projects as it goes into our community. I want to talk about the purpose and need of our community investment plan is, we really want to take a look and anticipate the future needs of a growing community. We're growing quickly. We want to make sure we anticipate what we have and what we do in the future. We want to do our short and long range planning. I think our CIP team for this entire project is engineering, finance, planning, and public works. So the projects are coming from different directions, and it's really a comprehensive type of look at things. We want to take a look with the Commission's aid, take a look at formulate our strategic long-term policy, exactly what's important for our community as we move forward. We want to make sure our spending is predictable and transparent to make sure that everyone knows when we're going to be spending these funds, how we're paying for the projects. So it's really it's a tool to help us financially and consistently move forward with improvements in our community. We have a cycle that I'm going to start talking about as we move forward to our new community investment plan. It's a redundant cycle that's an annual basis. So we want to have a 5-year plan, so we can scope out for the 5 years, and we pray and have projects go up to 20, 30 years in there. They're illustrative projects. But we really want to take a look at a process that we can drill down for what our 2019 projects are, and realistically, in the next May timeframe, May to June, we want to nail down our 2020 projects. We're a little behind the game right now in 2019. But we want to have this iterative process. So every year, in May, I want to have an approved CIP for the following year so we can start design, notify people what's going on in these meetings, in these projects. The other timeline as we move through, we can kind of take a little bit closer look here, that we start off by evaluating our system plan, we identify candidate projects, we sit down with all the departments and we assign the funding sources. Have federal funding for these projects? Do we get sales tax? How we're going to pay for all these different projects? So we start formulating what the true cost is, and we can assign these total amounts for every year. We want to prioritize the projects. Maybe some projects will move up a year, some might drop back a year, seeing what the current priorities for our community is. They want to sit down here. We want to have a public input meeting when we introduce all the projects to everyone in the community and get their feedback and their feelings on that priority and on the projects themselves. And then a commission approval in May, and then we just start the whole process again for the following year. So we just want to get down there and have a more formalized process on how projects are derived, how they're funded, and how they're communicated to our public. Examples of our capital projects goes anything. I think we define anything that has a value of over $50,000 as a capital improvement that's not on a reoccurring basis. This is a $50,000 cost for recurring. It should be in a budget, not a capital improvement. These range from vehicles, buildings, water and sewer projects, streets, signals, everything. If we're going to buy a new Vector truck that costs $250,000 to $300,000, it needs to be in that capital improvement plan, and we need to be able to identify how we're paying for it. It's going to come through facility fees or where those different projects come through. So it's really how everything affects the public. We should also, in part of our CIP, identify recurring costs. I don't think we do a fair enough job right now that if we do a capital improvement, that we identify the ongoing annual cost of maintenance or whatever it be. One example off the top of my head is we had an odor control project down in our South Regional lift. We identified the cost for this, but we did not necessarily identify and put into our recurring budget the cost to operate it, of the chemicals to reduce the odors coming out there. So that was, it's not a major surprise, but these are type of costs that should be accounted for and make sure that we through and forth, because that's the true cost of a project. Here's an example of what we currently have right now. It's a project sheet that separate it by year. We have the project, is it a street project, a sewer project, a water project, how much we anticipate the cost to be, and we prioritize that by year. And that's not really, doesn't come out and give us a lot of information what's going on here. I don't think, and nor does my team members with me on this, think that we truly are giving people a true idea of what the purpose and need of these projects are. So you see a quick little example on the next one. I have a couple sheets of the CIP that we've been working on. These are each project that's going to be in the CIP. I can provide these to you anytime. We have them all. Has an individual 8x11 sheet on there. We have a map of where the project's at. We have a purpose for the project, why we're going to build it, what's necessary to build it. We have a cost. We want to separate out these costs by year. If we want to build the project in 2020, what do we need to do in 18 and 19 to make that project? Do we need to go get it right away? Do we need design properties? Whatever those might be to finish that project, so we can calculate our costs by a yearly basis. So right here, the examples I have here is a water tower on the left and the Sheyenne and 9th Street interchange there. So that's just give a full, more transparent going forward to our public.
Chris?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mayor. When we're this transparent like this, which is great, but what dollars do you go by? Today's dollars, or are you going by 2020 dollars? You know what I'm saying?
What we try to do on a lot of these different projects, and it's difficult to always track that dollar. That's why we have Jim here. Luckily, he's pretty detailed. As we have had he's re-energized our group quite a bit coming on here. He's pretty excited. But we really want to do year construction. So if we put in a project, we create the project sheet, and maybe it comes in here in 2019, but we're looking at 2022 for construction. We want to add probably a 3% inflation factor to that, so we get 2022 construction dollars. So we want to put in those three. Okay. So increase it by about 10%, just so we have that future cost. Because we all know everything's going to go up, because they're not going to get cheaper. So we want to make sure that we account for those dollars to move forward. Thank you. In summary, our community investment plan, we want it to be transparent. We want to be fiscally constrained. And what I mean by fiscally constrained, we want to make sure we identify where all those funding sources are coming from to make sure we're not spending ourselves in the poorhouse, and we know how we're going to do this in the long-term impacts everything. And we truly want to be responsive to our citizens. So I think everyone's noticed it, that there's a real strong anticipation out there for more transparency on city staff and everyone combined. So that's truly what we're looking for as we move forward. So I'm available for any questions. I didn't have to take a look over here. Tina's probably looking at me. I also want to talk to you about the 2019 projects. We plan to bring our prioritized sheet here on second meeting in February. We're going to sit down here. We have a working meeting on Wednesday. We're going to start talking about our 2019 projects, prioritize them. We're going to try to figure out the funding sources, and we want to bring that to you in the second meeting in February, so we can strain our 2019 projects.
Any questions for Mr. Brungart?
Chris, when do we expect the study information back on the core of the city for infrastructure needs?
The core area infrastructure needs. We're looking probably late spring time frame for that. We're having a meeting here first week in February with the staff to start talking about the priorities and that. So they're tying everything back together. We're going to let lots of all our data is into them, and their priorities and tying into the matrices and starting to work on the project sheets for us.
I really like your proposed CIP worksheets, I guess you want to say, or plan sheets. It's nice to have descriptions. I see you got grading on them as well, so we can use that to balance, what really needs to be done more immediately and which is more of a long term.
I mean, and some of the other things that we've talked about as a group, as we want to have this document, and we know it's going to evolve. So whenever there's a new project, we want to have a new project sheet that comes in here, and we have a developer comes in, requests a new subdivision, that comes a new project sheet, and we have a meeting to amend the CIP and include it in whatever year that we want that in there. So we just have that iterative process, and we have notification to about everyone possible.
Mr. Turdovik.
You know, one potential question I have on the project sheets, you know, we want transparency. I'm not sure we get transparency unless we break it all the way down into, you know, potential special assessment districts and so forth. I mean, you know, when I look at a project, if I'm sitting in the audience and I, you know, live on the south side of West Fargo and I'm looking at a project sheet, if it doesn't tell me where that's going to be assessed, that's a big piece of the transparency that's missing. I'm not sure if that's possible to get to at this early stage, but it would really add a lot of value to getting input from West Fargo residents.
That's a good comment. I can't say that we've thought about that comment. At least I certainly haven't thought about that comment before, and we'll certainly talk about it on Wednesday so we can get some type of area that how it fits into our special assessment policy. That's a good comment. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions for Mr. Brungart? Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
Well done. And I agree with Commissioner Thorstad that the secondary sheets are critical, you know, in reviewing the existing CIP. You know, one has to really engage to try and figure out where that's at. Having those supplemental sheets will be of great value.
Thank you. I'll get together a smatter and just email them out so you have some references. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next order of business is item number 5 is a presentation of initial results from the Community Special Assessment Forms. Mrs. Richards.
All right. My name is Melissa Richard. I'm the Communications Director for the City of West Fargo. Thank you, Commissioners, for having me up tonight to talk about these community forums on special assessments that we've been having. This is just an initial look at the feedback that we're getting and the data that's been coming out primarily through the surveys. But I want to start out tonight by just thanking a lot of the people and components and places that are really making these forums happen. First of all, West Fargo Public Schools, they've allowed us to use their aquatic center, Legacy Elementary, Brooks Harbor, Flame of Faith United Methodist Church, Eventide at Cheyenne Crossings. I also want to thank our speakers, Tina and Dustin and John, who've been at the meetings to provide all the education and overview. The City Commission, you guys have been in attendance and hearing that feedback. Our small group leaders, staff has really stepped up to help fill that role, and most of all the attendees that have come out, especially in this frigid cold, to talk about a not fun topic at times, but we really appreciate all the participation we've had. Just a little bit on the survey design and analysis. We did have a slight change, so I just want to make sure that we have a full transparency on that. Originally at the first meeting, we did a pre and post survey, and the idea was to be able to measure the impact of the event that it had on the attendees. But as we found out, I think most of you saw too, the time was a little tight during those meetings, and we didn't have all the time that we wanted to make sure we got both surveys to come in, and so we switched to just one survey, and now we go around at the end of the night and encourage everyone to fill that survey out, but we've added questions that still allow us to measure the impact of the event. The data that I'm going to present tonight, therefore, is the information that came from the post-event surveys at the first meeting and the completed surveys at the rest of the meetings. I do have the pre-event surveys, that data captured as well. That'll probably be involved in the first report, but I just want to make sure it's clear that we selected one of the surveys, and that was the post-event survey to combine with the others. And then the qualitative feedback, you guys have been there and you've heard it, and that'll be layered into the final report, but we won't go into that tonight. We'll just take a high-level look at those initial results from all of the all of the attendees and the events that we've had so far. So attendees were asked to identify, those that completed a survey, to identify themselves as residential, commercial, both, or other property owner. We have 17 statements that we asked them to rate on a scale of 1, which is strongly agree, to 5, which is strongly disagree. We also asked them to list their preferred methods of special assessment communication, and then they have the opportunity to provide other comments as they'd like. The data that I'm going to show you tonight will give you the average score for all events on that scale of 1 to 5, as well as the distribution of responses on the scale. So you can see the percent of people who responded at a 1 or a 2 or a 3, and so on and so forth. One note, not everybody that turned in a survey completed every answer. So the charts that you'll see that charts the number at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have been adjusted based on the number that answered the question. So if I got 17 surveys and there's a particular question that only 15 people actually answered, it's adjusted to reflect it as a percentage so that as best as possible, all things are equal. So we've gone through 4 events so far. We have 1 left, and overall we've had about 132 attendees. We've had 55 surveys completed, and we've had 14 small group discussions. Pleased with attendance. I wish it was a little bit higher, but so far so good, I think. Of that, the large percentage of those that have attended have been residential, very few commercial, a couple that have identified as commercial and residential. We've also had 2 attendees who also stated that they owned agriculture property within the city limits, is how we would interpret that result, and 1 who noticed that they also owned rental property within the city. I've ordered the slides tonight, not in the order that the survey questions are asked, but in order of agree to disagree. So we're going to start off with the statements that they most strongly agreed with and work our way down to the disagree. And overall, our strongest agreement statement is my acknowledge of special assessments has increased because of this event. I am very pleased with that result because that was one of the things that we wanted to track and measure for these events. And I think that we have seen as events go on that there's been a lot of knowledge sharing and information that's been passed along, even though it is a very complicated topic that takes a lot to go through. The next one is I would be willing to pay a higher lot price for a new home to fund the development's infrastructure instead of special assessments. This one's at a 2.1. It's a common comment that I think we've all heard in the Q&A and as well as the small group feedback about what the developers are doing, how they can help shoulder the burden, the relationship the city has with the developers, and so that's something. I understand how the city of West Fargo utilizes special assessments to fund infrastructure projects. That's at a 2.3. Not much to say there except for that was part of our education to describe how special assessments factor in and some of the other sources that we're using to fund those projects. I feel my input regarding special assessments is valued because of this event. That's at a 2.3. That's that other metric that we're tracking specific to these events, and I'm pleased to see that's in the agree category. I'd be willing to pay higher sales tax to fund infrastructure projects instead of special assessments. That's at a 2.4. So now we're kind of seeing of all the options that we asked them about, we'll start to see it kind of, these are the most favorable, and then there's some that aren't so favorable, and you'll see that in the data results. As a property owner, I feel I have a responsibility to seek out information about future infrastructure projects that could result in special assessments for my property. This question in particular is probably up for a lot of interpretation, and a lot of the feedback and the interactions that you have might lead you to believe it means a few things. I think that one of the factors in play here is that we've heard that they want stronger communication about it. So how do we make it easier for you to go out and get that information? As well as it's a complex process to follow, let's say, a project from the CIP to all the way through, and so some of those hopefully will factor into that score in the future and be an improvement. I would be willing to pay higher utility fees to fund infrastructure projects instead of special assessments. I think this one is an important one to just demonstrate how these results that I'm giving you tonight are the average of all of the events. I would say last week's event, there was high interest in that street utility fee and how it's used. But if we take a look at all the events all together in the data, it's a little lower than, let's say, the cost of the lot or the sales tax. So just something to keep in mind as we look at this data. And we might all have very personal or specific interactions based on this topic, but just having this quantitative feedback helps us get a level set of how everyone is feeling. I understand how to file a protest against a special assessment. That's at a 2.7. Again, there's education involved with that process, and that's been brought to light in the presentations. I can easily find information about my property's current special assessments. That's at a 2.8. I think one of the things that I feel confident saying is that walking through where you go on the website, how you pull up your property, and how you check your special assessments was a lot of the new knowledge that people received at these meetings. I would have the City of West Fargo forgo infrastructure projects even if it means decreased services to avoid special assessments. That's at a 2.8, but as you can see, the results are pretty evenly distributed among the responses. And so I feel like this is a pretty neutral response to the question, and there might be some deeper digging that we want to do. It might be a platform to think about more education about the projects that we are doing. So just something to keep in mind. I can easily find information about my property's pending special assessments, 2.9. Again, I think showing them the website and how you can check that column on pending special assessments is important, and good info that's getting out there. The idea of future versus pending versus current certified special assessments is terminology that there needs to be a lot of education on as well. I'd be willing to pay higher property taxes to fund infrastructure projects. This one's pretty solidly at a 3.0. I know I personally overheard a lot of feedback about not wanting to necessarily go to the property. There's other more preferred methods to look at to offset that cost. I'm sure you have all had your own interactions on that as well. Generally, I feel like the City of West Fargo only completes infrastructure projects that are necessary. That's at a 3.1. I'm pleased that it's at a 3.1 and it's not more strongly on disagree. I think that means that generally our citizens are seeing that we're doing that which needs to be done, and that there's not a resounding feeling otherwise. I feel I benefit from the lower interest rate special assessment bonds receive. That's pretty neutral. I think when you're just looking at the dollar amounts, the interest rate can sometimes not be the highest factor. I feel the City of West Fargo is using special assessments appropriately to fund infrastructure projects. That's at a 3.4. I think we're starting to get into the disagree side of things a little bit here, but things that we've heard before. I feel like my concerns about special assessments are considered by the City of West Fargo. It's a number obviously we'd all like to see improve and work on, and the first toe in the water on this. I feel special assessment districts are fairly created by the City of West Fargo. That's at a 3.6. That's a concept that's very complicated and complex, and probably something that would need even more education beyond what we can provide in that hour-long presentation, but still we're at a 3.6 there. I can easily find information about future infrastructure projects that may result in special assessments to my property. Again, I think this underscores that just the process of connecting the dots is a long, tedious process that we'll really have to dig into if that's direction from you to look into. And then 4.1, this is the one that scaled the most on the disagree side. And that's, I feel the special assessment notification process used by the city is sufficient in getting information to property owners. I don't think that's any surprise to any of you up here or anyone that's attended. Those are the initial results. This is really interesting. How would you prefer the City of West Fargo shares information about special assessments? And the percentages are based on the number of people that responded. You could pick more than one. So let's say if there was 30 people who chose to answer this question, 96% of those people selected letter, and 93% of those people selected website. And then after that, the mix gets a little bit more down at the bottom. Social media is kind of sometimes, so people say they don't check social media. Email is a little bit up there. Public meetings still received a pretty high mark, which was a little surprising to me because it feels like it's so hard to get people out. But again, our population were people that were willing to come out and talk about it too. There was one other, and that was to provide the information through the water utility bill, to consider that, but that was the only recommendation there. These are just themes based on the notes I get back from the small group leaders, and these are very high level, and I know you all sat in the meetings as well, and heard the feedback. But communications obviously is a number one theme that kept coming up. Forecasting projects, and that's not only letting people know ahead of time, but what is our process for bidding and getting estimates and communicating and the idea of how we present the total project and our process for presenting the total project from beginning to end was a theme that came up a lot. Developer funds, the idea of the developer funding more of the projects and how that lays into it. And then sales tax got brought up again and again. How can we increase that? How can we increase the amount of sales tax coming in? What can we do to make that a little bit better? Obviously, there's a ton of educations and pros and cons on all of these that then becomes a process of education too, and finding out what the public really wants us to take on. And this is just a list of next steps that I believe is going to happen. One is investigate options to address this feedback, and I think a lot of you have already heard that the staff is looking into it. Jim is looking at the software that, I don't know what it's called. BSI has some functionality for providing communications on special assessments. We're looking at what we can do with the website, what we can do with GIS and mapping and things like that. So we're hearing the feedback and we're thinking about it already. We just don't want to start making recommendations without getting a clear direction. We'll be posting the presentation online with a link to the survey so we can send it out to a broader audience and get their feedback. We'll keep that data separate from those that go to the meetings because the experience is different, and so we want to keep that in mind as we're looking at it. Our final forum will be on Monday the 28th at Brooks Harbor Elementary School. Then we'll be compiling the meeting and feedback into a final report, and then we'll provide the final report to the City Commission. And obviously that final report won't just be me, there'll be lots of staff and members involved in that and what we provide to you. That's it for what I have. If you guys have feedback too beyond what you want to talk about tonight that you want to make sure gets captured in the data as well, please let me know and we can get that incorporated. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Richards. Very well done. Commissioners, any questions for her? Well done, and thank you for all your work. Next order of business is item number 6, City Administrator's Report. Mrs. Fisk.
Good evening, Commission President and Commissioners. My report will be quick, so you can all get home where it's warm. I want to remind you that tomorrow night, 4 to 6 at the VFW will be the DOT public meeting on the Cheyenne Street, what we call Road Diet, and that is where we got the funding to help create our more downtown experience. So we're excited for that to take place tomorrow night. Our final special assessment forum will be at Brooks Harbor Elementary, and that will be on the 28th, next Monday. And that will be at 6:30. And the only other thing I have is I will be out of the office Wednesday through Friday, but I'm able to be reached by phone or by email. So if you have anything for me.
Any questions for Mrs. Fisk? Thank you. Is there any correspondence anyone would like to share with us? Are there any other non-agenda items that you'd like to discuss?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Commissioners, your challenge next week is to 2 weeks is to beat Simmons.
I'll be here 2 weeks, so I'll be on a ass. Yeah. I was
Go phone it in.
I was waiting.